A long time ago, when I was younger, I used to be pretty good at reading a map, because that was a necessary skill back then if you did any amount of driving across country. And then along came Google. Well, first there was MapQuest, and then Google Maps, and then GPS, and all of these things that made life so much simpler. All you had to do was to get used to somebody telling you where to turn, what lane to be in, what's coming up next. All of those things are good preparation for marriage. So I got used to those very quickly. But they also kind of took something away because you get to be over-dependent on those. Last winter, I was taking a part of course of study down in Dayton, Ohio, and I was driving a car from the airport to the hotel. I'd just gotten into town. And I was relying totally on the GPS to get me where I was going, and it's supposed to be a 10-minute trip from the hotel, and about 20 minutes in, I figured there was something horribly wrong. And I was going down the interstate, and I was pretty sure I was headed to Pennsylvania. And my sense of direction kicked in, and I said, no, this isn't right, and I looked at the GPS, and it had just gone away. So I was trying to figure out what to do as I drove, and this was about 11 o'clock at night. And then I remembered way back when I was a kid, my parents ran the concession stand at Point Beach, north of Two Rivers. And we used to go wandering around out in the woods, the kids would. And we'd go on the trails, but sometimes we would get off the trails, and then you had the potential, at least, for getting sort of lost. But I remember something that I think my grandfather told me, and then my brother reinforced with me, is that you always knew what direction the lake was, because you could hear. He said all you have to do is go east, and you know you're going to come to the shore, and then you can find your way back to the lodge. And I thought about that, and I said, well, I know which direction I'm supposed to go, so I just reoriented myself and eventually ended up at a road that I understood where it was, and I found my way to the hotel. About midnight. That sense of being lost is not something that I relish, particularly far away when I'm by myself. And that sense of being lost, I think, is something that happens to a lot of people at some point in their life. I was thinking about that this week when I was preparing this message. Because when I left off last week, I had asked you a couple of questions. Who are you? What do you believe? What do you stand for? And I invited you to ponder those questions this week. I'm sure everybody gave it great thought. I know Friday or yesterday when I said something to Rachel about, this is part 2 of the message, and I left these questions to be pondered. I didn't know you could hear eyes roll. But they did. But they're questions at least to consider. Both personally and for ourselves as a nation. It might have escaped your notice, but there's an election coming up. You may have seen something about that. And we have to figure out who we are and where we're going and where we want to go anyway if we're going to know what to do in this election. And all of that kind of circles around to a question that I didn't ask, one that I didn't leave with you last week. First, I want to go back to those questions I did ask. Now, I'm not going to ask you to explain your answer or to testify or anything like that, but I would like to know how many people, if I ask the question, what do you believe in? How many people have thought about that enough to answer that question? Yes. Okay. Now get a little more abstract. If I ask the question, what do you stand for? What do you stand for? How many could articulate an answer to that? Those aren't easy questions. And I appreciate the fact, or the thought anyway, and the thought and the insight that goes into trying to answer those questions to your own satisfaction. They're questions that we all have to ask and we have to continue asking. But those of you who have an idea of what you believe and what you stand for, this last question is for you. And it's going to be what Einstein used to call a thought experiment. It's an experiment or an exercise that you do just in your imagination. Think about your answers to those questions. What do I believe in? What do I stand for? Now imagine that you are somebody else, somebody not yourself. But imagine also that you know yourself as a friend or a neighbor, a co-worker, or something like that. And if you are that other person looking at yourself, looking at how you lived your life and what you do and what your priorities seem to be, how you spend your time, if you were that other person, would you be able to tell what your answers to those questions were? If you were somebody else, would they know what you believe and what you stand for? Put it another way, that's kind of convoluted. If you ask an outside observer of your life which master or which masters you are serving, based on what they can observe, what would they answer? And would their answer match your answer? Now, most of us here, I feel pretty safe in the sanctuary. I think most of us here consider ourselves Christian. We believe that we're saved by the death and the resurrection of Jesus Christ, and we believe, or we say we believe, that as followers of Christ we are supposed to do what He teaches. But do we? Consistently? Do we consistently do that? Jesus talked a lot. All of that, love your neighbor and minister to the poor and house the homeless and feed the hungry and clothe the naked and befriend the powerless. Speak up for the defenseless. All of that stuff that He taught sounds great in the abstract, and it sounds wonderful when we're reading it and talking about it in church. Do we live our lives following those? Or do we say, well, those are all good ideas, but we've got people for that. We support charities, we support missions, we pay taxes, to social service agencies that take care of people. So what more do you want? I know you said all this stuff, Jesus, but we got people taking care of that, so what do you want from me? The uncomfortable answer from Jesus might very well be, I want it all. I want it all because I gave my all. I lived and I died as a servant to you so that you could see how it should be done. And that's the point where, metaphorically, at least many of us might be tempted to plug our ears and go, la, 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 la. I don't want to hear that. I'm saved. I know I'm saved. I don't want to hear about all these other expectations. Jesus expects that service to him is an all or nothing thing. We're not part-time Christians. At least we shouldn't be. But we're also not saints. So we strive to serve as best we can, always with the idea that regardless of what we've done, there's going to be more to do. Now, John Wesley, founder of the Methodist Church. If you're going to membership classes, this is a spoiler. But John Wesley fervently believed and lived the idea that choosing to serve Christ is not a single decision, but it's a journey. It's a commitment. Wesley believed that a true, committed follower of Christ showed it by living life, striving to live up to the life that Christ led, striving to live up to his teachings and standards. And Wesley did this knowing full well that we cannot earn salvation. That comes by grace through faith. But we do these things because we are showing gratitude for that salvation, and we are showing care for our fellow human beings. Wesley taught that we should live a good Christian life. And that means study. It means works. It means prayer, charity, worship. All of these and other things, these are steps on the road to what he calls sanctification. And aside from improving ourselves, they showed the world what we believed, and they showed the world, hey, this is what it's like to be Christian. Pretty cool. We show which master we serve by how we conduct ourselves and how we treat others. That's true for people. And it's true for nations. If you've looked at the news, you might get the idea that this is kind of a tough time right now in our country. If you listen to election coverage, you begin to feel that we've lost the ability to respect one another's differing opinions. If you watch the news in general, you see that we seem to have terrorists now acting randomly. We see riots, we see murder, rampant drug use. If you look around, you see injustice and poverty and the grinding, soul-crushing effect of hopelessness on the human soul. And all of this, at least in part, is a symptom of the fact that we have lost our identity. As a nation, we've lost sight of who we strove to be, who we wanted to be. I think we've lost sight of who we were created to be. One of my all-time favorite movies is from the early 60s. It's called Judgment at Nuremberg. Written by Abby Mann, directed by Stephen Kramer, I believe. And in that movie, Spencer Tracy plays a judge at one of the later Nuremberg trials, not the first ones, but the ones that came along later. And toward the end of the movie, he gives a speech leading up to the verdict and the trial, and he says something like, I'm not going to quote it exactly because I was too lazy to look it up. But he says, when you talk about a nation's survival, you have to ask yourself, survival as what? A nation isn't a physical thing, it's not a rock, it's what it stands for when it stands for try that again. It's what it stands for when standing for something is the most difficult. A nation is what it stands for when standing for something is the most difficult. And then he went on to say, before the world, let it now be noted that our decision is what we stand for: justice, truth, and the value of a single human being. Now, to me, that was a beautiful moment of film. It's also a great summary of who we should be as Christians. And it's also a good summary, I think, of what we should stand for as a society. I think we've lost that. Just like Jeremiah's Judah lost itself, its people lost track of who they were and what they stood for, of which masters they were serving, and they fell. It's something that can happen to any nation, no matter how powerful it thinks it is. But in today's reading from Jeremiah that we saw just a few minutes ago, we also know there was a glimmer of something more. In the midst of all of those weird Old Testament names doing things we didn't quite get, there was a glimpse of something more than just judgment. Because there was a glimmer of hope. Hope in that purchase of a plot of land that they all knew was going to be under Babylonian control. Purchased the land and they put the deed in a clay pot and they buried the pot because they trusted that someday that nation would be restored and that deed would mean something. There was a glimpse and a hope for the future. That's a hope that we can embrace as well. There's hope for us. For those of us who have not always been good servants, there is hope. There is hope that we can reclaim the blessed and joyful burden of servanthood when we embrace the full meaning and the full depth and breadth of what it means to be a follower of Jesus Christ. Years ago, there was the fad or the craze, or whatever you want to call it, of the WWJD, what would Jesus do? That was a great question. But today I think the question that we can start asking ourselves, or should start asking ourselves, is what would a servant of Christ do? In any given situation, and with any given problem that we face, the question we should ask is, what would a servant of Christ do? And then do. And if we can do that, there is hope that we can have an impact on the lives of others. If in everything that we do, we ask ourselves, who am I serving? Who knows what effect that could have on the world around us? And maybe, just maybe, if Christians everywhere could start doing this, could start doing this kind of servant revolution, we might start to see changes in the nation too. Because with our influence, maybe we could see society start functioning again as though all people matter. Maybe we could start seeing some of the division go away. Maybe we could see political discourse rise above the level of name-calling and mudslinging. It's probably a long-term project. maybe if we started it, the day would come when we could help our society figure out who we are again and what we stand for. And then not just figure it out, but actually start to live like we figured it out again. That's how we make a difference. Jeremiah knew 2,600 years ago. And Christ shows us every day that we are imperfect. And we struggle, and sometimes we fall, but the glory of Christ is that in falling we can still rise. Because in Christ there is love. And in love there is redemption. And in redemption there is always hope. This is what we are called to do.